The med bay of Outpost 42 had seen better days. Well, technically it had never seen better days, but it had at least smelled better before the ventilation unit started recycling the faint aroma of boiled protein rations into the sickbay air. The ceiling panels hummed in protest every time the artificial gravity recalibrated, and the med scanner in the corner emitted a noise somewhere between a sneeze and a hiccup whenever it was turned on. It was, in short, a very fine place to patch up miners who had learned the hard way that industrial plasma torches and hangover tremors were a poor combination. I was halfway through bandaging one such torch-burned arm, belonging to a miner named Brox, who had the physique of a rock wall and the pain tolerance of a startled toddler, when the airlock doors slammed open. Brox yelped as I yanked the gauze too tight. "What, is the station on fire again?" I asked, not looking up, though my tone carried the distinct weariness of a man who had lived through 3 station fires already. The answer was, not quite. Into the med bay swept a group of figures who clearly had not come to Outpost 42 for the ambience. Their armor gleamed silver, etched with filigree patterns that caught the flickering overhead light, and their boots struck the floor in perfect unison. At the center of the formation was someone slumped between them, and even from across the room I could see blood, a deep, metallic blue that spattered the floor like spilled paint. Brox, to his credit, whispered the obvious, "That ain't human blood." I finally looked up and saw her. She was taller than I expected, though that might have been the effect of her ornate armor. Her face was pale with pain, her eyes closed, and her long ears, elongated arcs, elegant and sharp, peeked from beneath tangled strands of dark hair. It was the only feature that marked her as not quite human, but it was enough to set her apart from everyone else in the room. "She requires treatment," one of the guards barked. Their accent curled around the syllables, a language forced into the bones of standard. I glanced around the room, at my jury-rigged equipment, the empty bottles of antiseptic lining the shelves like defeated soldiers, and then back at them. "I assume you're aware you've come to the least glamorous medical ward in the quadrant. We don't even have proper anesthesia. Closest I can offer is a strong drink and a lullaby. That earned me nothing but stares cold enough to chill the recycled air." Still, they set her down gently on the examination bed, well, the only bed without a dent shaped like a miner who once fainted onto it. As I reached for my gloves, another figure entered, older, robed rather than armored, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His own ears marked him the same species, though his eyes were sharp and unyielding. He gave me a single, measured look before saying, "You will treat her. But do not presume yourself her equal. She is of the royal line." "Royal line?" Brox muttered. "Like a princess." The robed one did not answer Brox, which was wise, as Brox rarely benefited from more information. Instead, his gaze settled on me. "You will be swift. And you will be careful." "Well, I usually aim for at least one of those," I said, tugging the gloves tight. When I began working, the room seemed to shrink around us. The princess, because that much was obvious now, had wounds running along her ribs where the armor had fractured inward. Shards of some crystalline alloy were embedded like cruel teeth in her side. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. "Scalpel," I muttered to myself, then paused. My one functioning scalpel had gone missing last week after I'd used it to pry open a stuck meal cartridge. Improvisation would have to do. I picked up the laser cauterizer, flipped it to the lowest setting, and prayed it wouldn't short out mid-procedure. The robed alien, who I assumed was some kind of healer or advisor, loomed closer. "You are too gentle. Wounds of battle require strength, not hesitation." I peered at him over the mask. "Well, I'm fresh out of brute force. Guess you're stuck with my bedside manner." As if to contradict me, the cauterizer gave a pitiful whine. I smacked it against my palm, and it finally hummed to life. The princess stirred faintly at the sound, her eyes opening just enough to study me. For a brief moment, despite the blood and chaos, her gaze was steady. She didn't speak, but she didn't recoil either. "See?" I told the healer. "She's already reassured." Or possibly horrified. Hard to tell with the years. The procedure was painstaking. Each shard had to be teased out carefully, lest it slice deeper. My hands moved slow and deliberate, ignoring the impatient shifting of armored boots around me. To fill the silence, I did what I always did with nervous patience, I talked. You know, most people on this station get injured doing something stupid. Falling asleep next to a plasma vent, arm wrestling in 0G, eating suspicious seafood imports. But you at least look like you had a proper fight. That earns my respect. Her lips twitched, almost imperceptibly, as though she wanted to smile but was too weary. That tiny flicker was enough. By the time the last shard was removed and the wound sealed, I was drenched in sweat and the cauterizer smelled like it had been through a barbecue. I peeled off my gloves and exhaled. There, I said. Good as new. Well, maybe not new. More like refurbished with minor cosmetic damage. Warranty void if she jumps back into combat within the next 72 hours. Brox snorted a laugh, which earned him a glare from the guards. The robed healer, however, said nothing for a long time. At last he murmured, too gentle for a warrior. I shrugged. Funny thing about gentleness. It keeps people alive. The princess's eyes fluttered again, and this time they stayed open long enough for her to speak. Her voice was faint, yet clear, gentle, but not weak. That silenced even the guards. For a moment, the humming of the failing med scanner was the only sound. Then the healer wrapped his robes tighter and turned away, conceding nothing, but retreating all the same. I busied myself with cleaning instruments, partly because it needed doing, and partly because I had no idea what else one said to an alien princess after patching her up in a dingy outpost medbay. Brox broke the silence in his usual helpful way. So, does this mean we get diplomatic immunity now? I groaned. No, Brox. It means I'll probably never get a quiet shift again. The princess, still weak but awake enough to understand, let out the faintest laugh, a sound like water striking crystal. And in that fragile moment, the dingy medbay of Outpost 42 felt a little less broken. The news spread through Outpost 42 the way mold spread through the hydroponics bay, swiftly, silently, and with a faint smell of trouble. By the time I finished sterilizing the last of the instruments from the princess's procedure, the station was already buzzing. Miners leaned over half-repaired consoles to gossip, mercenaries used it as an excuse to demand more pay from the commander, and someone in the cantina was already taking bets on how long before the outpost was blown to atoms in an interstellar diplomatic incident. I tried, very sincerely, to avoid getting involved. My plan was to retreat into my office, a closet with a chair that squeaked like a tortured bird, and catch up on paperwork I hadn't filled out since the last inspection, which, to my eternal relief, the inspectors had been too drunk to notice. But before I could even sit down, the medbay door hissed open and in walked two of the alien guards. They had that rigid, ceremonial posture that suggested their spines were forged from alloy rather than bone. One of them announced, "The princess requests your presence." My first thought was, excellent, she's awake. My second was, less excellent, people who request my presence usually want stitches, not conversation. My third was, Brox has probably told the entire station that I touched royal ears by now. Sure enough, as they escorted me through the corridors, heads turned. Dockhands pretended to check cargo manifests while staring. A group of mechanics paused mid-argument over a faulty thruster coil to point and whisper. One particularly drunk patron outside the cantina shouted, "Oi, it's the royal physician." "I'm not royal," I muttered. "Or particularly physician Y." The guards ignored me, which was probably for the best. They brought me to the station's only hab suite that didn't smell faintly of coolant leaks. The room had been hastily cleared for her use. Rugs draped over cracked flooring, a portable filtration unit humming against the wall, even a pot of something green and fragrant perched on the table. The princess sat propped against a stack of cushions, her long ears angled toward me like receivers catching stray signals. She was pale, but her eyes were alert now, scanning me with the kind of curiosity that could peel skin. "You," she said softly, her voice still hoarse. "Me," I agreed. "The only medic on this fine station who didn't fail his exams so catastrophically that he was reassigned to janitorial duty." One corner of her mouth twitched. I decided to take it as a smile. The robed healer was there too, of course, arms folded so tightly across his chest I thought he might snap his own elbows. "Her Highness requires further monitoring. Your methods are unorthodox." "Unorthodox keeps people breathing," I said, checking the bandages. "Besides, orthodox medicine would have involved an actual sterile operating room, which we don't have. Unless you want me to wheel her into the cargo freezer and call it a day." The princess let out a faint laugh, more exhale than sound. The healer looked scandalized, as though laughter might delay recovery by at least 3 years. During the checkup, she asked questions. Small ones at first: how long had I been on the station, why were the walls so dented, did humans always keep their food in vacuum-sealed bricks? I answered as best I could, though I left out the part about once dropping a brick of nutrient loaf on my foot and limping for a week. Humor helped bridge the silence. When I told her that our coffee machine had been broken for so long we started using recycled coolant as a substitute, she laughed so hard she had to clutch her side. The healer nearly fainted. Afterward, the guards let me go, but not before one of them muttered, "The station whispers your name, human." Which was not at all creepy. Back in the med bay, I found Brox waiting for me, perched on the exam table as if he'd never left. "So," he said, eyes wide. "She talked to you?" "She's recovering," I said. "That's all you need to know." "That's not what the cantina says. They're saying you're her chosen healer. Some even think," he paused dramatically, which was always a bad sign, "that you're her consort." I stared at him. "Consort?" "Yeah. You know. Special friend. The kind you share rations with." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Brox, if the aliens hear that, I'll be ejected out an airlock faster than you can say, royal scandal." He grinned. "Well, at least you'll die famous." The gossip didn't stop. By the next day, the commander called me into his office, a cramped space filled with maps of the asteroid belt and at least 3 bottles of contraband liquor. He looked like a man who hadn't slept since the last ice age. "Explain to me," he said, "why half my crew believes you're in some kind of interspecies romance." I blame Brox. He sighed, rubbed his temples, and shoved a data slate at me. "Raiders have been sighted again. If they realize she's here, this station becomes a prime target. I need her alive, and I need you to keep her alive. Preferably without causing a diplomatic meltdown." "No pressure," I said. That night, when I returned to the suite for another checkup, the princess was more talkative. She told me about her world: oceans that sang when the moons aligned, forests where the trees bent together to form natural cathedrals, cities that grew organically from coral-like stone. She spoke of her people's pride, their endless battles with raiders, their suspicion of outsiders. "And you?" she asked at last. "Why are you here, on this broken place?" I shrugged. "Failed out of the glamorous life. Turns out the military likes their medics to follow orders. I have creative interpretations of protocol." She tilted her head. "Like using a food scalpel to treat a wound?" "Exactly." Her laughter this time was stronger, though it still came with a wince. I tried not to look too pleased with myself. The healer interrupted then, as always, with a sharp glare in my direction. "Your levity is misplaced. She must remember her duty, not be distracted by human frivolity." I opened my mouth with a retort involving the therapeutic value of laughter but thought better of it. Still, the princess's eyes glimmered with mischief as though she agreed. Later, walking back through the station, I overheard two engineers debating in hushed tones. "He's got her ear, you know." "Ear?" "Yeah, you know, like humans say, heart. Only with her, it's ears. Long ones. Sensitive." I picked up my pace before I had to hear more. The next few days blurred into a pattern. Tending her wounds, fielding ridiculous rumors, and watching the station prepare for the possibility of attack. Every conversation with her was a careful dance between gravity and humor. She'd tell me about ancient battles and solemn oaths, and I'd counter with stories of miners losing at poker to a cleaning drone program to beep at random intervals. Somehow, between her gravitas and my absurdities, we found balance. Yet beneath the jokes, I felt the pressure building. The raiders drew closer, the commander grew more frantic, and the healer's disdain deepened with every smile I coaxed from her. I didn't know what role I was stumbling into, but it felt larger than anything I'd ever patched up with bandages. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a question gnawed: when the station came under fire, as everyone knew it would gentleness still be enough? The princess decided she had been lying in bed long enough. I discovered this not because she informed me, but because I walked into her hab suite for the morning checkup and found her standing in the middle of the room, draped in a robe that looked suspiciously like it had been stolen from the commander's private stash. Her guards hovered nervously nearby, trying to look authoritative while also clearly terrified of being blamed if she toppled over. "You should be resting," I said, setting down my medkit. "I am not resting," she replied, in the flat tone of someone who had already made up her mind. "I am walking." Her steps were careful, deliberate, but there was fire in her eyes. Fire, and maybe a touch of stubbornness that could outmatch a gravity well. "Great," I muttered. "Because what this station needs right now is a wounded royal wandering its corridors like she's inspecting the wallpaper." She arched one long ear toward me, the gesture strangely expressive. "You would keep me confined?" "Confined is such a strong word," I said. "I prefer safely tucked away where you can't trip over loose wiring and make me look bad." She smiled faintly, then announced to her guards, "We will walk the station." The guards, of course, looked at me for confirmation, as though I had any authority whatsoever. I sighed and grabbed the portable scanner. "Fine. But if she collapses, you're carrying her, not me." So we walked. Or rather, I walked beside her while she leaned just enough on my arm to make my pulse jump every time her fingers brushed my sleeve. The guards marched ahead like we were invading enemy territory, clearing the way through the narrow corridors. It didn't take long for the rumors to catch up with us. Every corner we turned, crew members froze mid-task. A mechanic with a face full of grease dropped his wrench. A trader carrying contraband fruit fumbled and sent spheres of spiky purple produce bouncing down the hall. Someone whispered, "That's her," and someone else hissed, "And that's him." I tried to ignore it. The princess, however, seemed amused. Her ears angled toward each hushed comment like satellite dishes scanning for signals. "Your people stare," she murmured. "They stare at anything that isn't broken or leaking," I said. "So you're basically the most fascinating thing to happen here since the vending machine learned how to swear." That made her laugh, though it turned into a cough. I steadied her as discreetly as I could, and she straightened with regal dignity, as though coughing was something other people did, not her. We reached the central promenade, which was more or less a wide corridor lined with flickering hollow signs advertising everything from authentic asteroid jewelry to genuine imported Earth pizza, the latter of which tasted like despair compressed into a crust. Here, the crowd couldn't pretend not to notice her. Conversation stopped, drinks were forgotten, and someone dropped a tray of noodles that slithered across the floor like confused worms. A drunk miner staggered forward, squinting at her. "Blimey. You're tall," he slurred. Then, spotting me, he added with a grin, "And you're the lucky bastard who patched her up, eh?" "Keep walking," I hissed at the princess, but she paused, tilting her head as if the miner were some curious specimen. "You speak freely," she said to him. "Yeah, well, too much station ale'll do that," he said cheerfully, before his friends dragged him back. The princess's laughter rang out, light and crystalline. Her guards nearly fainted at the audacity of it all. We continued through the promenade, attracting stares like a comet attracts debris. I tried not to think about the stories that would be circulating by nightfall. The medic and the princess, strolling arm in arm, as if we were on some romantic promenade instead of dodging noodle spills. Eventually, we ducked into the hydroponics bay, where at least the plants didn't gossip. The princess inhaled deeply, her face softening at the scent of greenery. "This place," she said, "it reminds me of home." I glanced around at the crooked rows of cabbages and the stubborn patches of moss clinging to the damp walls. "Your home must be very cabbage forward." She smiled. "Not cabbage. But alive." While she admired the plants, I noticed the scars again, faint lines along her wrists, half hidden beneath the robe. They weren't fresh like the ones I'd treated. Old, healed over long ago. Signs of battles past. It was the kind of thing the robed healer never mentioned, the kind of thing she carried quietly. Before I could say anything, one of her guards cleared his throat. "We should return." But she shook her head. "Not yet. I wish to see more." So we walked further. We passed the hangar bay, where dockhands scrambled to patch up ships that probably shouldn't have been flying in the first place. One of the smaller cargo haulers let out a groan that echoed like a dying wail. The princess arched an eyebrow at me. "Is it supposed to sound like that?" she asked. "Absolutely," I lied. "That's the ship's way of saying it's happy." She stared at me for a long moment, then laughed again, shaking her head. By the time we returned to her suite, she was pale and trembling, though she hid it well. I helped her to the cushions, and for once the healer didn't scold me. He only muttered under his breath, too gentle, as if it were both an insult and a reluctant acknowledgement. Later that evening, alarms blared. Not the usual false alarms that indicated someone had accidentally kicked a panel loose. These were sharper, more urgent. Raider ships had been spotted near the asteroid belt. The commander convened an emergency meeting in the operations room, and somehow, to my utter horror, I was summoned as well. Me, a medic with precisely zero tactical experience. I arrived to find the princess already there, seated with regal calm despite her pallor. The commander pointed at the holomap of the belt. "They're probing our defenses. If they discover she's aboard," his gaze flicked toward her, then toward me, and I realized with a sinking feeling that my presence was no longer optional in this mess. The princess leaned forward. "I will fight." "You will rest," the healer snapped. I cleared my throat. "If it helps, I have extensive experience patching up idiots who rush into fights. So I'm qualified to say, bad idea." Her eyes locked on mine, steady and fierce. I was not born to hide. The room fell silent. The commander muttered something about shields and patrol routes, but my mind was stuck on the sight of her, injured, yet unyielding. After the meeting, as I walked her back to her suite, she said quietly, "Your people see me as fragile. But you see differently." "I see someone who shouldn't rip her stitches open trying to be heroic," I said. "Heroism is overrated." "You know what isn't overrated? Staying alive." She smiled faintly, her long ears tilting toward me. "And you? You stay alive with humor." Mostly sarcasm, I admitted. We reached her door, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then she said, "Your gentleness confounds my healer. But it comforts me." I opened my mouth to reply, but the words caught in my throat. So instead, I gave a lopsided grin and said, "Well, at least someone appreciates my bedside manner." She laughed softly, and as the door slid shut between us, I realized that laughter had become our secret weapon, lighter than a plasma rifle, but far more disarming. Outside, the station creaked and groaned, the raiders lurking ever closer. Inside, for the first time, I felt that maybe gentleness could hold its own against the gathering storm. The first explosion rattled the walls like a fist slamming against a tin can, and half the ceiling lights went out with a pathetic flicker. I had just finished reorganizing my medkit, something I only did when I was trying to distract myself from looming disaster, when the station's klaxons howled to life. "Raiders," came the commander's voice over the intercom, sharp and breathless. "All hands to stations. Brace for impact." I barely had time to grab my kit before the door burst open and one of the alien guards shoved his head in. "The princess." Yes, I know," I said, already moving. "She's about to do something extremely stupid, isn't she?" The guard's silence was confirmation enough. When I arrived at her suite, the scene was exactly as I'd feared, the princess in half-fastened armor, her wound still pink beneath the bandages, standing tall and regal like she hadn't nearly bled out on my table less than a week ago. Her healer hovered beside her, torn between outrage and resignation. "You're supposed to be resting," I snapped. "And you are supposed to be repairing miners who fall into machinery," she countered smoothly. "That is exactly what I'd like to be doing right now." The room shook again as another blast rocked the station, sending a pot of hydroponic herbs crashing to the floor. The smell of mint filled the air, which felt bizarrely inappropriate. "I will not cower while others fight for me," she said. I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Listen, Your Highness, bravery is all well and good, but you're about 3 steps away from tearing those stitches and making my hard work very, very pointless." Her ears twitched, and she fixed me with a look that was both stubborn and amused. "You think my life is only your work?" "Right now, yes. Entirely my work. And I take professional pride in not watching my patients undo themselves for the sake of dramatic gestures." To my surprise, her guards chuckled, very softly, but enough to make the healer glare daggers. The princess herself smiled faintly, though her hands still hovered near her armor. Before either of us could win the argument, the intercom crackled again. "They've breached the hangar," the commander shouted. "We're taking fire in the lower decks. Repeat, raiders are inside." The guards tensed, readying their weapons. The princess straightened. I swore under my breath and grabbed her arm. "Fine," I said. "If you're going out there, then I'm coming too." Her eyebrow arched. "You are not a soldier." "No, I'm worse," I said, shoving extra bandages into my pockets. "I'm the guy who has to clean up after soldiers. Which means I'm indispensable. Now let's go before I change my mind." We moved through the corridors as the station shuddered under fire. Sirens wailed, lights flickered, and smoke curled from ruptured panels. I kept one hand on the princess's arm, steadying her when the deck lurched, though I told myself it was purely medical. In the hangar bay, chaos reigned. Raiders in jagged armor stormed through the airlock, blasters spitting red light. Station security fired back from behind crates and tool benches, turning the place into a half-lit battlefield. Sparks rained from the ceiling. The smell of ozone choked the air. The princess's guards charged into the fray with practiced precision, their blades humming with energy. The princess herself moved forward, determined, though I noticed she leaned ever so slightly on me as she did. I dragged her behind a pile of crates just as a bolt of plasma scorched the floor where she'd been standing. "See?" I said breathlessly. "Gentleness is useful. Gentleness keeps people from becoming smoking craters." She gave me a look that was equal parts exasperation. The first explosion rattled the walls like a fist slamming against a tin can, and half the ceiling lights went out with a pathetic flicker. I had just finished reorganizing my medkit, something I only did when I was trying to distract myself from looming disaster, when the station's klaxons howled to life. "Raiders," came the commander's voice over the intercom, sharp and breathless. "All hands to stations. Brace for impact." I barely had time to grab my kit before the door burst open and one of the alien guards shoved his head in. "The princess." Yes, I know," I said, already moving. "She's about to do something extremely stupid, isn't she?" The guard's silence was confirmation enough. When I arrived at her suite, the scene was exactly as I'd feared, the princess in half-fastened armor, her wound still pink beneath the bandages, standing tall and regal like she hadn't nearly bled out on my table less than a week ago. Her healer hovered beside her, torn between outrage and resignation. "You're supposed to be resting," I snapped. "And you are supposed to be repairing miners who fall into machinery," she countered smoothly. "That is exactly what I'd like to be doing right now." The room shook again as another blast rocked the station, sending a pot of hydroponic herbs crashing to the floor. The smell of mint filled the air, which felt bizarrely inappropriate. "I will not cower while others fight for me," she said. I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Listen, Your Highness, bravery is all well and good, but you're about 3 steps away from tearing those stitches and making my hard work very, very pointless." Her ears twitched, and she fixed me with a look that was both stubborn and amused. "You think my life is only your work?" "Right now, yes. Entirely my work. And I take professional pride in not watching my patients undo themselves for the sake of dramatic gestures." To my surprise, her guards chuckled, very softly, but enough to make the healer glare daggers. The princess herself smiled faintly, though her hands still hovered near her armor. Before either of us could win the argument, the intercom crackled again. "They've breached the hangar," the commander shouted. "We're taking fire in the lower decks. Repeat, raiders are inside." The guards tensed, readying their weapons. The princess straightened. I swore under my breath and grabbed her arm. "Fine," I said. "If you're going out there, then I'm coming too." Her eyebrow arched. "You are not a soldier." "No, I'm worse," I said, shoving extra bandages into my pockets. "I'm the guy who has to clean up after soldiers. Which means I'm indispensable. Now let's go before I change my mind." We moved through the corridors as the station shuddered under fire. Sirens wailed, lights flickered, and smoke curled from ruptured panels. I kept one hand on the princess's arm, steadying her when the deck lurched, though I told myself it was purely medical. In the hangar bay, chaos reigned. Raiders in jagged armor stormed through the airlock, blasters spitting red light. Station security fired back from behind crates and tool benches, turning the place into a half-lit battlefield. Sparks rained from the ceiling. The smell of ozone choked the air. The princess's guards charged into the fray with practiced precision, their blades humming with energy. The princess herself moved forward, determined, though I noticed she leaned ever so slightly on me as she did. I dragged her behind a pile of crates just as a bolt of plasma scorched the floor where she'd been standing. "See?" I said breathlessly. "Gentleness is useful. Gentleness keeps people from becoming smoking craters." She gave me a look that was equal parts exasperation and gratitude. And yet here we are, in a smoking crater. Details. What followed was a blur of chaos. I ducked from cover to cover, hauling wounded back toward the medbay while trying to keep the princess from leaping into battle like some kind of inspirational statue. She insisted on lending her voice, shouting commands that rallied both her guards and the outpost's ragtag defenders. Against all odds, people listened. At one point, Brock stumbled in with a burn across his chest, grinning like a maniac.